Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. You know we love taking these deep dives into the stories behind the headlines. So if you're enjoying it too, please hit that like button, leave us a comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future episodes. Today we're going to be tackling a story that's coming out of Africa. And it's honestly a story that has left me with more questions than answers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one. We're talking about Ibrahim Traoré,
Okay.
the president of Burkina Faso. And the waves that he's making, not just on the continent, but internationally as well. He's young, he's defiant, and he's really captured the imagination of a lot of people, particularly young people across Africa. But he's also a figure who seems to be walking a very, very dangerous path. To help us unpack all of this, I've got our expert here ready to share their insights. So where do we even begin with this story? I mean, we're hearing reports of assassination attempts. There's this rejection of invitations to major global events. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's a really captivating story for sure, and I think it really highlights just how complex the dynamics are in Africa right now. Perhaps a good place to start would be with these assassination attempts, because I think they really underscore the high stakes that are surrounding Traoré and his vision for Burkina Faso.
Okay, let's start there. I mean, it is a little bit chilling to think that there are people out there who want to see him gone. So what can you tell us about these attempts, and who might be behind them?
Well, based on the information we have from a variety of sources, it seems that Traoré has actually survived multiple attempts on his life since he assumed power. As for who might be behind them, there are a number of potential actors that we have to consider.
Okay, let's break those down. I imagine that internal opposition would be pretty high on the list, right? You know, those who stand to lose from the changes that Traoré is making.
Exactly. Traoré has taken some really bold steps that have disrupted the status quo in Burkina Faso. He's nationalized the country's gold mines. He's challenging the influence of former colonial powers like France. And he's really promoting this vision of Pan-African unity and self-reliance. So these actions have undoubtedly made him some enemies among those who benefited from the old systems of power and influence.
Right, so it's kind of this classic case of upsetting the apple cart. But wouldn't those internal forces have been dealt with already, after the coup that brought him to power?
That's a good question, and I think it speaks to the depth of the resistance that Traoré is actually facing. He's not just trying to, replace one leader with another. He's trying to fundamentally change the way that power operates in Burkina Faso, and that's a much, much more difficult task.
So you're saying these assassination attempts aren't just about removing Traoré, they're about crushing the movement that he represents and deterring others from following a similar path. It's a warning.
I think that's a really insightful observation. It's about sending a message not just to Traoré, but to anyone who dares to challenge the established order.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another aspect of Traoré's leadership that I find particularly fascinating. And that's his rejection of international invitations. I'm talking specifically about his decision to decline an invitation to the inauguration of Donald Trump back in, 2017?
That's right. According to one source, Traoré declined that invitation to attend Trump's inauguration, a decision that raised a lot of eyebrows at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not every day that you see a leader, especially a relatively new leader, turning down an invitation from a global superpower like the United States, even one as controversial as Trump was at the time. So it makes you wonder, what was Traoré's thinking there? What message was he trying to send?
Well, it's difficult to know for certain, of course, but I think we can get some insights from both his actions and his broader rhetoric. Traoré has consistently emphasized his commitment to putting the needs of Burkina Faso and its people first.
So by declining this invitation, was he essentially saying, my focus is on my own nation? I'm not here to play the game of international politics or court favor with those who may not have Burkina Faso's best interests at heart.
That's a very plausible interpretation, and it aligns with his broader message of self-reliance and a rejection of external influence, particularly from former colonial powers.
It's a bold statement, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But could it also be a risky move? By turning his back on potential allies and sources of aid, is he potentially isolating Burkina Faso on the global stage?
That's a key question, and it's one we're going to explore further as we delve deeper into Traoré's story. But one thing is clear. He's not afraid to make tough choices, even if they come with potential consequences. He's operating from a very different playbook than many world leaders.
So he's not playing by the traditional rules of the game. He's charting his own course, even if that means facing opposition both at home and abroad. It's a high-stakes gamble.
Indeed. And it's a gamble that has captivated the attention of many across Africa and beyond.
It's definitely capturing a lot of attention, especially among young people across Africa.
Right.
I mean, we see the images of these huge crowds cheering him on, hailing him as a hero. So what is it about Traoré that's resonating so strongly with this demographic?
I think that's a really important observation, and it points to a larger trend that we're seeing across the continent. There's this growing disillusionment with the old guard, the leaders who've been in power for decades, often seen as corrupt and out of touch with the aspirations of younger generations.
So Traoré represents something different, a break from that past.
Exactly. He embodies a new generation of leadership, one that's not afraid to challenge that status quo, to stand up to external pressures, and to really prioritize the needs of their own people over, international accolades or financial gain.
It's interesting, though, because if we look at someone like William Ruto in Kenya, he's a relatively new leader as well, but he seems to be facing declining popularity, even accusations of corruption. So why is it that Traoré's message seems to be striking such a chord, while Ruto's is faltering?
Well, that's a complex question. And there are definitely nuances to each situation. But one key difference, I think, might be this perception of authenticity. Traoré walks the walk, so to speak. He's known for his simple lifestyle, his willingness to engage with ordinary people, and his rejection of the trappings of power. This contrasts sharply with leaders like Ruto, who are often perceived as being more interested in enriching themselves and consolidating power than actually serving the people.
So it's not just about what you say, it's about how you live, how you embody those values you espouse.
Exactly. And this authenticity is particularly important, I think, for younger generations, who are increasingly skeptical of empty promises and political rhetoric. They want to see action. They want to see leaders who are truly committed to making a difference in their lives.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's go back to this idea of Traoré rejecting external influence. Is there a risk that he might go too far? That by pushing back so forcefully against countries like France, he might end up harming Burkina Faso's economic prospects?
That's a legitimate concern. And it's one that many observers are watching really closely. Is this a delicate balance to be struck, I think, between asserting sovereignty and maintaining beneficial relationships with other nations?
So it's not about complete isolation. It's about redefining those relationships, but on more equitable terms.
Precisely. It's about saying, we are an independent nation, and we will engage with the world on our own terms, not on terms that are dictated by former colonial powers or those who seek to exploit our resources.
This brings us back to the assassination attempts. If Traoré represents such a threat to these entrenched interests, both internally and externally, how can he possibly hope to survive, let alone succeed in implementing this vision?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question that's on the minds of many who are watching this story unfold. And Traoré's survival so far, I think, speaks to a certain level of resilience, and perhaps to the fact that he does have strong support within the military and among certain segments of the population.
But is that enough to protect him in the long run? Or is he walking a tightrope, one that could snap at any moment?
It's impossible to say for certain. The situation in Burkina Faso is fluid, and the threats he faces are very real. His success or failure, I think, will likely depend on a complex interplay of factors, including his ability to maintain popular support, navigate internal divisions within the country, and skillfully manage relationships with these external actors.
It's a high-stakes game, that's for sure, and one that has implications not just for Burkina Faso, but potentially for the entire African continent.
Absolutely. Traoré's story is resonating far beyond the borders of his nation. He's become the symbol of hope for many who are yearning for a different kind of leadership in Africa, one that prioritizes the needs of its people, and really challenges the legacies of colonialism and exploitation.
So, as observers of this unfolding story, what can we take away from all of this? What should we be paying attention to as we watch how things develop?
I think there are several key things to watch for. First, how does Traoré navigate those internal challenges within Burkina Faso? Can he build a coalition that is strong enough to withstand that inevitable pushback from those who benefit from the old order?
And how do those internal challenges intersect with the external pressures that he's facing? Can he maintain this defiant stance against former colonial powers without jeopardizing Burkina Faso's economic stability?
Those are crucial questions, and I think we also need to pay attention to the reactions of other African nations. Will they see Traoré's example as a blueprint for their own aspirations for independence, or will they be deterred by the risks involved?
It's a story with so many layers, so many potential outcomes, and one that raises, I think, fundamental questions about power, resistance, and the future of Africa in this rapidly changing world. It really does feel hopeful, but also precarious. At the same time, you have this young leader inspiring a whole generation with his bold vision for a more independent and prosperous Africa. But at the same time, He's facing these immense challenges, threats to his life, and these powerful forces that seem to want to see him fail.
Yeah, you put it really well. It's a story filled with this tension, a sense that the stakes are incredibly high, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the future of the continent as a whole.
It makes you wonder, what does success even look like in this situation? Can Traoré actually achieve this vision of a truly independent Burkina Faso, free from the grip of neocolonialism and exploitation?
Right. And I think it might be helpful to sort of unpack what we mean by neocolonialism in this context. It's often used as a catch-all term, but in Traoré's case, it seems to be about dismantling systems that perpetuate economic dependence and political subservience to former colonial powers.
So things like, control over natural resources, unfair trade agreements, the lingering influence of French language and culture and institutions.
Exactly. He's trying to break those chains and create a Burkina Faso that's economically self-sufficient, politically sovereign, and culturally confident in its own identity.
It's a tall order, especially given the limited resources and internal challenges Burkina Faso faces. How realistic is it to think that he can achieve all of this, even if he manages to survive these threats against him?
It's definitely a daunting task, and there are no guarantees of success. I think it's important to remember that change often happens in unexpected ways. Sometimes a single individual, a leader with a powerful vision and the courage to act, can spark a movement that transforms the entire landscape.
So Traoré might be that spark, that catalyst for a broader shift in these power dynamics between Africa and the rest of the world.
That's a possibility worth considering if he can demonstrate that a small nation like Burkina Faso can stand up, assert its independence, and create a more equitable system for its people. It could inspire similar movements across the continent.
Almost like a domino effect. One nation breaking free kind of emboldens others to do the same. But wouldn't that be seen as a threat by those who benefit from the existing global order? The former colonial powers, those who hold economic and political sway.
Absolutely, and that's why the stakes are so high. Traoré's success could potentially disrupt those established power structures and challenge the assumptions that have governed global relations for decades.
So it's not just about Burkina Faso, it's about the potential for a really fundamental shift in the way the world works. And that's both exciting and a little bit terrifying, isn't it?
It is. It's a reminder that history is not static, that the balance of power can shift, and that even small nations can play a role in shaping the course of events.
Well, it's a story that's still unfolding and one that we'll definitely be watching closely. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. If Traoré does succeed, what kind of world does that create? What possibilities does it open up for Africa and, frankly, for all of us who are invested in a more just and equitable global order?
That's a great question, one worth pondering. I think it challenges us to imagine a world where power is more evenly distributed, where resources are shared more fairly, and where the voices of those who have been marginalized are finally heard and respected.
It's a powerful vision, and one that I think gives us all reason to hope so, folks. As always, we encourage you to share your thoughts, your hopes, your concerns in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going, and thank you for joining us on The Unseen Wisdom.